our friend and our disruptor in chief, if I can call you that. I'd like to welcome you to this special maiden edition of the dialogue series organized by the Center for Social Media Research, of course, which for which I work as the executive director. And it was obvious for us to have you first on the hot seat because of your particular role in the media space, especially new media. And as I already mentioned to you, we're going to be discussing, I want us to start a conversation around the role of citizen journalism and our political process. What are the opportunities and dangers? And I want to kickstart a dialogue by asking you, as a disruptor in the media space, straight off, what do you think is the major contribution of citizen journalists to our democratic process? Maybe if we can start that way, then we'll take it along as we go. You're welcome, Mr. Omoyele Sowore, and I'm very, very delighted to have you in the hot seat for this first edition. You're welcome.
Thank you very much for giving me the prime time on your show today. I'm glad that there's now an NGO that is researching on social media and its role in promoting news, lifestyle, engagement, and interaction in ways that has never happened before. He came into this space somehow by accident and because of my personal disappointments in mainstream media. When I left Nigeria in 1999, I was only used to print newspapers. I had heard about emails, and we used the emails, a particular email, to facilitate my trip to the US. But I didn't know it was going to be possible in not distant future to have opportunities to publish online. So when I arrived in the US, I heard about the nigeriaworld.com, where there's an aggregation of news collected from Nigerian newspapers, but they had no link. There were no link backs. So I then came to realize that the mainstream media wasn't doing well enough for my own liking. And I started thinking about how I could create a platform that would get more news available to people, raw news, uncensored news. And it was about the time also that indie media was emerging in the US. Apparently, some people also had the same feeling as I did, and had gone to Seattle, Washington, Seattle at that time to cover what was then known as the anti-WTO protest. But what we were seeing on CNN and other mainstream media was the meeting that was going on the inside, not the protest that was going on the street. So when I came upon raw videos, photos, and text related to what was happening through these indie media platforms, I was like, wow, I wish we can replicate this with regards to Nigeria. And that was how the idea of citizen journalism came upon me. Of course, also it was therapy because I was a major activist in the pro-democracy movement. I just left behind a brand new democracy, and I felt like a coward that I left. So I was looking for a way to re-engage with that activism that I left behind. So I also wanted to have an activist medium platform that would handle my feelings about the emerging democracy in Nigeria. So that's, in a nutshell, how Sahara Reporters started. But it didn't start as Sahara Reporters. It started first with me writing some stories for The Guardian on Sunday. I remember Anikulapo German being my editor, and I did 2 stories, and he said, this is a bit too hot for us to handle. And then I started writing articles for nigeriaworld.com, but the owner also wasn't that cooperative. Sometimes he would accept the article, sometimes he would reject it. And then I met a guy online who was Jonathan Elendu, and we started the Elendu reports together, I think in 2005. By the end of that year, I knew I was ready for something different and big, but I wasn't sure that it was going to be that big. But the way I started was to crowdsource information from people. Who do you know is corrupt out there? You know, there's a lot of stories about all these Nigerian government officials who had mansions all over the place. So I started just sourcing for this kind of information. And it turns out that when I used my Google, a lot of this information was available online, unknown to many people. So uh, that was, that was how I started small, but it grew pretty rapidly, I would admit.
All right, fantastic. So, given how you started and what you just described to the public, to Nigerians who are following us, I see a lot of people are coming into the room. I would like us to discuss what do you think is the major contribution that the likes of Sahara reporters and those who have copied that model, what's the contribution to our media and is there any real benefit to our democratic process?
I think it has deepened the democracy in Nigeria to the extent that it democratized the media itself to the point that I think I helped in lowering the barrier into the entry of journalism. So it became no longer an exclusive preserve of some people, whether they are rich or professional. And more people came on board as citizen journalists, and it was a brand of journalism that the government could not regulate, and the official journalism platforms also could not regulate. But the interesting thing about citizen journalism is that it's self-regulating, in the sense that it incorporated means of reactions. So you have people being able to use comment section on the sites that we created, and that was pretty interesting that people could immediately or instantaneously react to news, either to regulate, or call the writers to order or to add, or sometimes just do what they like with news. That part of it was pretty powerful. Before, if you saw something on a print newspaper, you have to write to the editor. The editor has power to publish your reaction or not. On this side of the divide, you didn't need to talk to the editor before you reacted. Of course, the editor has got some power to regulate what you say, but I don't think people had enough resources to regulate 200,000 comments, except you disable your comment section. And even if you disable your comment section, somebody will take a link to that story to Facebook, or when you post it on your Facebook, and they will react there. They will engage over there. So that aspect was pretty powerful. But the part about self-regulation is that the moment you start making mistakes, it's also very unforgiving. So there are people out there who are on a daily basis calling you out and say, this is a lie, it didn't happen. Of course, some do it mischievously. In fact, a lot of them do it mischievously as time went by. So your readers became your regulators, and they're very important. In fact, their regulations or their regulatory roles are pretty more intense than if you were being regulated by government agencies sometimes, because you could lose followers as quickly as possible. And if your news sourcing depends on the crowd or crowdsourcing, your demise could also depend on them.
All right, fantastic. So let me take you up on one of the things that you said when you started to engage with this last question. You mentioned one of your contributions, of course, would be that you lowered the barrier for entry into the media space. But some will argue that that's exactly a problem because in lowering the barrier, we also appear to have lowered the quality of output that you have on the other end. Now you have high incidence of high incidence of fake so-called quote unquote fake news. So what would be your reaction to this? Would you think that lowering the barrier has also lowered the quality of what we have in terms of journalistic output?
No, what I found out was that the lowering of barriers largely financial, because before, to set up a newspaper, you have to own a printing press and own huge electric generators. In the case of Nigeria, hire big hands and big heads, buy vehicles, hire a massive office, with or without cubicles, hire security men, and all those very expensive means of producing news. In this case, it was one man, one laptop. With regards to what you refer to as quality of news, I actually think that fake news was so hated. I was being hated by government because people took away the business of faking news from government officials. So that was when it became democratized. They knew that they no longer have what I'll call the exclusive reserve to tell lies. But that's not to say that the phenomenon of fake news is not there. But I'm just telling you that being a Nigerian, there's no media platform that lies like Radio Nigeria or NTA News. I mean, if you wake up one day and you say Nigeria is safe and you keep repeating it all day, you're lying, right? Especially when the federal capital is surrounded by bandits and terrorists. If you wake up and say the economy is improving, right? That's fake news. If you wake up and say that workers have been paid when they have not been paid, you wake up and tell all these lies and nobody counters you. It's all fake news. So we must be able to sieve, the intentions of people who like to control the media space from those who want to get information on a regular basis. Information is key to helping people make informed decisions. I mean, citizen journalism has gotten to a point where it does, business of even telling about weather, traffic jams, health situations, security. There's nothing it doesn't do. And to now reduce everything to the quality of news because a lawyer is not involved in writing news, I think is just a little bit overboard.
All right. So, and then let me go to your beginning, and I note the fact that you said you were happy with what was available, and when you saw the opportunity for you to use small means to engage in that space, you went in. Now, would you say that there was an ideological conflict with the establishment, traditional media, legacy media houses? Would you say you are in any way ideologically different to what they do? And do you bring something new in terms of ideology?
I didn't hear you very well. I think the network was jumping. But if I get you correctly, you're asking if I have ideological differences with the mainstream.
Exactly. Given the fact,
established
I know the fact
media.
that you mentioned that you were unhappy with what was available when you saw an opportunity for you to involve.
Yes. I think before I left Nigeria, I was a big fan of print media in particular. And at that time, they had also started relaxing, or they had started deregulating the media space by radio station. So they did some work. But by the time the military was driven out of power, the mainstream, was hijacked by politicians. So if you count all the print media, you know that all their owners have political affiliations. And whereas there's nothing wrong with that, just like you can have right-wing media in the US and liberal media, they call them. You could also tell that the agenda was beyond just ownership. It was about control, and I didn't like that. I just saw that the quality of news under military rule, media practitioners, was way better than when the politicians now took over the media space. And for me, it was partially a response to that Sahara Reporters became a project, that I will find a way to bypass all the bureaucracies, all the shenanigans, and the corruption that had become rampant within the mainstream media. So on that note, I would say that it's very clear that as to what I thought the role of media should be and the role they were playing in the country. But regardless, and I think for them, let me say first, it was a motor sin for them, for a lot of them. It's like this guy just came from nowhere and just started disrupting the media space, and we're losing money, we're losing business, we're losing prestige. And I think till today, most of them have not forgiven me, in terms of how they react to news affecting me, how they look at me, and how sometimes they just don't want to have anything to do with me, even when I'm facing monumental injustice in our society. But I also do think that, interestingly, my work helped a lot of them to overcome some of their fears and complacencies that were destroying their work. So they could always rely on Sahara Reporters to do stories that they don't want to do, or otherwise they were not bold enough to handle. They just say, hey, we got it from Sahara Reporters. Some will credit me. When it started, no one of them would credit me. But over time, they will give us credit. And then some other times, as time went by, we just rewrite the story, with impunity and claim credit for it. But my role and job is not to come and enforce copyright. It's to make sure that information that is undiluted is available to the public in the ways that it has never been before.
All right, excellent. So I picked two things from your comments. Right. First, you mentioned the involvement of politicians post-military, and then of course corruption in the media. These two issues are big, and we don't hear serious discussions around them as it affects the media and as it affects the media's incapacity, the way it has affected the media's ability to be able to perform its, democratic constitutional rules. Now, which of these two issues, corruption or the involvement of politicians, is the bigger of the two problems in your assessment of what you're seeing in the industry?
I think that they carry the same weight, because the mainstream media was largely hijacked by corrupt politicians, and they had an agenda to cover up the corruption. But over time, too, the media practitioners themselves they were immersed in corruption. Because there's so many stories to write, but there's so much more stories to kill. And so many of them will go for the ones that needed to be killed. And that one is more, I would say, more lucrative than the ones to be written. So you find out that politicians have also figured out that the media in Nigeria is not very keen on doing serious investigative work or critical analysis of socio-political issues affecting the country. So an average governor or even local government official runs his own media company or media center. And what they basically do is they write stories for the media and pass it on as press releases. And some of the times, media don't even touch it. They don't investigate where they just paste it as they get it. Or they rewrite it, and what do they do now where they share among themselves? And you find the same story in every newspaper relating to matters of national importance or performances of state governments or the federal government or local governments. So, but there was also another key area, which is the private sector. The private sector is even more keen, and you've worked in those sectors before, in ensuring that they get pristine coverage of their activities. And to do that, there's a lot of activities that goes under the bridge there. So there's a lot of temptation also out there to make sure that the media is not doing real media work, as I like to call it. So it takes ownership and also intent on the part of practitioners to be involved in what has become media's biggest problem, I think.
All right. So if you, in your assessment, if you are able to deal with corruption and the involvement of the politicians, you will then be able to clean up the media. Are there any other issues, any other problems that beset the media that doesn't allow them to do a good job of performing to hold the leaders accountable?
I think also because the media has become lightly complacent, and the media unions had become also embedded with government, a lot of the regulations were passed under, why they were not paying attention. So some legal issues, the legal barriers. For instance, there was a time that the Court of Appeal somewhere, I think in Ogun State, ruled that public officials could, file libel lawsuits in state high courts. And that was a big blow to the media, but nobody was paying attention to it because naturally the governor is the one who appoints, not directly, but they recommend the chief judge of the state. Who do you think they'll be loyal to? The governor. So if I write a corruption story against the governor in Taraba, you take me to Taraba and I'm based in Abuja or Lagos, am I going to get justice? Probably no. In fact, the safety of my lawyers become also an issue for me. It's like, how do they go to Taraba, Jalingo, to litigate a matter that's involving the governor and get out safe? We just had a case yesterday where one of our lawyers, my lawyer, Inebehe, was litigating a case of defamation against the governor of Akwa Ibom State. And the chief judge, without trial, sent him to jail for 30 days for contempt of court, simply because he wanted to please the governor. Nothing more. That probably wouldn't have happened at the level of it wouldn't have happened at the level of the federal high court, where I think this jurisdiction on libel should have been domiciled. So you also have the cyber stalking laws that went through when it happened without people paying attention to it, and pretty much it has limited bandwidth in terms of its ability to victimize anyone. You could be a reporter or a blogger, or you could be an ordinary citizen. A pastor or governor can write a petition against you to the police, and the police, without hesitation, will come and get you arrested and get you detained. And before you know it, you are facing, life imprisonment for expressing yourself on Facebook, Twitter, or any of these microblogging sites. So those are also hampering, in addition to the fact that the Nigerian government had placed a fang on the Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation. I think it was, yes, the Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation, the regulatory body, for media, mainstream media activities in Nigeria. They find TV, radio, and I think also, I don't think they regulate newspapers. While they're live, they interrupt live shows and make sure that they are yanked off the air. And everybody's wondering, how did this happen when they couldn't get away with such things under military rule? So these are some of the problems that are themselves, inhibiting the free flow of media production in the country.
Right, but I'll take you up on this because we thought those who keenly watch the media thought that post-military there should be better performance because of the Freedom of Information Act that was successfully campaigned for passed. How come we're not seeing any corresponding output in terms of investigative reporting at the other end, despite the fact that you have now an FOI? And you mentioned performance under military was totally different. You had great reports, great magazines, great journalists who are holding even the military accountable, but that's not happening now. What's the missing link?
Well, you know, when the push for FOI was in high gear, I was part of an FOI Yahoo groups, and I jumped in there because I had started Sahara Reporters, and that this idea that you are saying that the FOI law, when enacted, will be a cure for all is an illusion, because FOI requires that you make a request to a government official agency, and that request must be respected within a certain number of days, weeks, or months. But you have not taken into consideration the fact that if your request is not respected or honored, you have to go to court. You have no way of self-enacting, or self-enforcing this law. And at any rate, there's no country in the world where the best investigative reporting depends wholly on FOI laws. No, this is just, for me, a superficial law that says, hey, you know, if they come and ask you in your agency about, you know, how much was spent on buying petrol or diesel, you are under obligation to tell the public. But you're also not under obligation to disclose everything. You can say, okay, we're buying diesel for $1,000 per gallon, but you're not disclosing if you are buying it from your wife or your kids. You can redact those areas. So on that basis, FOI law does not work for people who want to do like real in-depth work. But then you don't take into consideration that you are dealing with people who are dressed in impunity, that they will not honor this. Even when you go to court, they rather waste your time, because these are not urgent matters for Nigerian judges. And, you know, asking for adjournment and adjournment, before you know it, you've spent 4 years, you know, huge amount of money moving lawyers from, you know, every day to court and getting nothing out of it. So I asked them in those days in the Yahoo group, I said, the problem is that you people who are pushing for these FOI laws are journalists themselves. You have not treated the information you are getting from the public. Why are you wasting your time? I like the law, but don't tell people that the moment this law is enacted, there will be no more problems in getting information. And I think the FOI law has been enacted now for almost maybe 15 years ago. I don't know the exact date, but it's been a while now. And nobody can tell me that it has gotten one scoop or one major information that shook this country from an FOI law request or FOI request from any government agencies. None, I've not seen any. So it's a law on the books, and it's not been domesticated in a lot of the states or the federation. In fact, some federal agencies will tell you, they'll reply you that they don't have, they're not aware of FOI law, you know. Some will tell you that the information you are seeking for is not covered by FOI, that's what their lawyers have advised them. So how do you deal with a society that is vast in impunity, officials are vast in impunity, you know, and getting information? I, for instance, has never written an FOI request before, but I've published over 5,000, you know, I say this all the time, over 5,000 articles, investigative reports, personally, that were published. And that have never been challenged. And it didn't come from it. They came from crowdsourcing information, documents, photos, videos. And for me, I think people should invest more in making sure that they have a newsroom that is very, very sound and nosy in terms of looking for what is real news, how people can write great investigative reports and embed, because these days you must do investigative reporting in such a way that it must be evidence-based so that there is no question about how you came about your story. So I do evidence-based, one of the things we started, evidence-based reporting. I'm not saying that we're the first to start it, but we made it such that documents, photos, text, and videos, some cases, can interact in one investigative reporting. And nobody will be in doubt that those things happen.
All right, I like the last part of your response, and I like to take you up on that because some of your fiercest critics, we talk about your methods, and the methods, they are orthodox, and to that extent that there's fears that this is in itself undermining journalism, the very essence of journalism, ethics, and all that. How do you respond to that criticism of your methods in getting documents, in getting documents and getting information?
Well, honestly, I think if you have started a new project or any innovative idea, you have people who criticize that. And then they evolve over time, having gone through all sorts of tests. And one of the things that came against me earlier in the game was testing the notoriety, I use the word advisedly, of my method of gathering news and information and publishing them and distributing them. And very early in the game, I was sued several times, not in jurisdictions where you could say, oh, well, the judges. I was sued in the US. And one of the lawsuits lasted 4 years. And I was prevailed upon several times to settle out of court because I was the one who was being sued, and I refused until I won the case. I was sued in my private capacity in those days. And one day, one lawyer, when I've been sued a third time, one lawyer who assists me a lot called me and said, just by this lawsuit, you have been able to prove that your method and strategy is right, because otherwise these judges here would have ruined, you would have gotten a judgment against you that would have ruined your business. And I think by now in the US, I've been sued like 5 times and won, except in one instance where the person who sued requested for settlement. And that was the most recent one. And we then decided to settle out of court. So these are things that are well known. That's number one. Second is that, to circumvent a society that is very, very dodgy in terms of getting information, you must invent and employ or deploy new strategies to get information, because it is these strategies that have made citizen journalism very attractive. I don't know how many citizen journalism platforms we have today, because they come under different nomenclature. Some of them call themselves bloggers, some of them call themselves citizen journalists. In fact, they don't even use citizen journalists anymore very much. Some of them call themselves publishers, some of them call themselves vloggers. So there are a lot of citizen journalism outlets that are out there now that I can't even count. Some of them emerge almost completely from Sarah Reporter style, or republishing simply things we wrote before they now expanded to other areas. Today, we have Nigeria-related content creation platforms that are, I'm sure, are running into thousands. And they mostly deploy the strategies that I started using for disruption very early in the game when I started. And the mainstream media has also gone in that direction. I remember, I think around 2014, I was invited to UBA. UBA had a media party or conference. Everybody was there. And I spoke there briefly. When I was speaking, they quickly grabbed the microphone from me. And what I told them was that all of you are still sitting down here publishing newspapers. I said, newspapers are going out of business. Nobody will be reading newspapers anymore because even you yourself don't wait till the next day to read news. You read other people's news. What are you still doing with the printing press and others? And I encouraged them. I said, I advised them. I said, you better go innovate. Otherwise, you will end up writing for Linda Ikeji. What I said was not reported, even though every media company was there. They did not report what I said, but it is what came to pass. Because an average newspaper publisher some 10 years ago was circulating up to 50,000 newspapers per day. All the newspaper prints combined together today are probably not doing more than 20,000. All of them. I heard there was a time that Daily Times did almost 1 million. Punch once did 700,000 newspapers distributed in one day. But all of that has changed. And a lot of them fell by the wayside because they came late to the game. They came late to innovation. Are you still there?
Sure, yeah, fine.
Yeah.
All right, so fine. Then let me take you up again regarding your methods. I'm sure your Arise TV interview and something that you said there obviously didn't sit well with some people in the media. And it has to do with the revelation that the former vice president used to pass information to you against his boss. And the interpretation simply is that that's like disclosing a source that been good to you. And in journalism, you protect your source by all means. Now, how do you react to this? Let me just straight away ask you, how do you react to that criticism? It was all over social media yesterday regarding that your comment on Arise TV.
Well, it's a totally different scenario, and I'll explain it to you categorically. One is that the fact that Garba Shehu was disclosing information on Obasanjo was a well-known fact. In fact, they went one morning to surround his house in Abuja and wanted to get him arrested. He called me and we put out the news that they were trying to harm him. So, and Obasanjo sent DSS down to his house because it was disclosed that he was the one making those documents available. So it wasn't something new. I didn't disclose anything. I just disclosed it for the first time from my end. It was well known in those days when Obasanjo was fighting Atiku that they were leaking information on both sides. Obasanjo too was leaking information to us. So it wasn't. But I also used it to rejig Atiku's memory when he said that I don't know what is happening in Nigeria. So, because this is no longer news and everybody knows that they have done this in the past, I used it to remind him that, but if I didn't know what is going on in Nigeria, why was it that you were one of my sources of getting those kind of information? You see, journalists write even books after several years of revealing on certain stories, they'll reveal the person who was the informant. I think you know about the Watergate, right? So
sure, absolutely.
Yeah. Hello?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you know about the Watergate. Well, the guys who were information on Watergate, all their names have been revealed because time have taken care of that period. So I don't know why everybody is even worried about it, except for political reasons. I needed to respond to Atiku adequately that I'm not the newbie he's talking about who doesn't know anything about Nigeria, when he himself relied on Sahara reporters in those days to defend himself, and at the point found the site to be credible enough to provide information. So to publish their own side of information. It also tells about the credibility of Sahara reporters in those days. that contrary to what people were saying, we're not biased. We requested for documents. We just don't publish what you send us. We would request with, if Garba will call, we'll say, where's the document? We want to see. So, and we use those documents to tell the story. So if I had revealed that he's a source when he was directly in line of fire, then it won't be appropriate. But after like 20 something years, it's a broadly known fact that Garba Shehu was arrested, or at some point brought in as a source. That was not disputed. Everybody knows that in Nigeria. So there's no need for the brag, but hey, this political season.
All right. So let's move on now to the link between citizen journalism, the democratic process. What's the impact? What can we point to? We had Occupy Nigeria 2012. We have the multiplication, proliferation of citizen media outlets like you have described. Now, how come 2015 election, the one after, you don't have a corresponding increase in the people participating in election? What's the missing link again? So we have all these activities who are involved in media output, and then you don't have any direct impact, so to speak, on the democratic process. I know, for example, the last election, you were a presidential candidate. Fela Durutui was a presidential candidate. You guys had, this big profile on social media, and yet the votes, people are expecting more. Let me just put it that way. So what's the thing that is missing?
Well, it is difficult to say that social media or citizen journalism hasn't had impact on democracy. It has. But the question is, has democracy had impact on the citizens? That's a big question. And when democracy doesn't have impact on the citizenry, it would affect participation. It will affect participation in such a way that you could almost ask, this question you asked me, I asked myself before, because as time went by, politicians became immune to investigative reports. It's sometimes as if they are waiting for one big story on Sahara reporters to say that they stole money, and then they become more attractive to parties. So you have this money, let us come and be our candidate. And part of it was proliferation. There's too many platforms around, and sometimes it's difficult for people to believe. It's difficult for them to choose who to believe. And some of these things are also deliberate. Not only do politicians have newspapers, they also have bloggers lined up, who are loyal to them and who turn around stories in their favor. So the same way we are going after them is the same way they are going after the credibility of those platforms. And these days, whenever a story breaks, the first thing politicians want to do is not to react immediately, to see how it pans out. If it doesn't hurt them too much, they just let it fizzle. Before they're very overreactive, because they would be like reacting, I didn't do this, no, I only did that part. These days, they have become very immune, and you start to wonder if these things have impact on their conscience, because there are no consequences. There are no consequences anymore. They've been able to also, as we are shooting without missing, they have also learned to fly without perching, as Chinua Achebe said in one of his books. So that's part of the problem. But also the good side of it is that it has brought more socio-political awareness. I don't think Occupy Nigeria would have been so big if there was no social media, both to amplify the need for a fight and to keep telling the story about how the fight was going on. NSAS would not have been so big without social media either. But the thing is, like you rightly mentioned, how would this lead to something that will radically change society? And that is why I think media or social media or whatever it is should take its consciousness from just cruise or noise to something more critical, in which they're asking questions like, after all this, what's next? And if you pay any little attention to what happened in this election cycle, you see the impact of NSAS, social media there, because finding more young people saying, we want to change the country. But not the downside, the most downside to it though, is that majority of people that have the time, I'm not saying everybody that has the time to do the social media, that is Facebooking, Instagramming, and Twittering. I don't know if these words are correct. Are mostly based abroad. The people who are in the diaspora have the most data. Everybody in diaspora probably have unlimited data. When I got to Nigeria 4 years ago, I realized that people data goes to sleep and they wake up with their owner. So when you want to go sleep in the evening, you switch off your data. There's a kill switch for data, and then next day. So by the time you wake up, you probably have missed out on a number of developments. But in diaspora, in most countries where there are Nigerians, people have data 24/7, very cheap data. So most of the contributions you see that makes you feel like, yes, we're about to get there, might likely come more from the diaspora. So diasporans don't have the ability to vote, or they don't have legal right to vote. And that affects what you see in terms of the final outputs in this social media things that are happening. So you have to go deeper than social media to understand politics because of the way people participate in social media. So if you look at the analytics of most of the newspapers, you can tell why things don't happen the way we expect them to happen. Because it's a map, and you see behind the map, this global map, you see, most people are reading from London, America, Canada, and then Lagos, Abuja. And so that map can tell you why the question you're asking now, those maps answer some question. Because diaspora is about 6 million to 10 million strong, and they can't vote, but they can talk all day long.
All right, so two things that come from what you just said. NSAS was big, quote unquote was big, but we haven't seen, again, maybe we haven't had a big election, major election after NSAS, but we'll be waiting till 2023. How do the youth of Nigeria translate that aggression, that ability to organize using social media, like we saw Occupy Nigeria, NSAS? How do they translate that into an electoral movement, one that can actually change stuff? 2023 is just around the corner. What do you think we should expect? Do we expect that there will be a political movement arising from the anger of the youth that we saw demonstrated during NSAS? Do we see something happening, congregating into a political movement going towards 2023?
I think there will be, but it may not be as massive as we would expect. There might be, but because if you go by the social media volume in off-season elections and the outcomes, you will see that the two major political parties are still dominant. Not because they are real or delivering on their promises or their manifesto agenda, but because social media has not permeated to the point that social media has complete control of thoughts and decision making for voters. So, but you're going to see more of that in this 2023 because we are in dire straits. And a lot of people are going to want to show that, listen, we can have a ballot revolution, which is a good thing to feel, to think. But when it comes down to voting, a lot of people who are on the social media platforms don't want to take the risk involved in voting at this time. You know, there's still people who like the idea of deniability. So what I mean by that deniability is that they just want to stay away if it's too dangerous. And the politicians have figured out how to make voting very dangerous. Even when eventually it doesn't become dangerous, you know, the moment you are not there, you can't partake. So there's a huge or massive level of elitism with social media. It's an elitist space, or people who are elitists are those who are aspiring to be elitists. That's where they show off. This is where they philosophize. But an average voter in Nigeria hasn't reached that level where, at the end of the day, they listen to what the elites say because of electoral malpractices, especially vote buying. A lot of people also who are on social media are too decent to buy votes. So when they go and see how voting is done, they just cringe, and some of them are like, "I'm never going to vote again." So there's a lot of issues that is still afflicting those who are on social media and those who are not on social media, or those who are partially on social media. And the politicians, being who they are, also use social media to gauge public opinion, you know, because all of them also have their own social media influencers, which has become a cottage industry in Nigeria, to help tune opinions in their favor without disclosing that they are working for these politicians. So just that. But I also have a belief that something could radically change between our elections that will make all these conversations almost moribund. We'll see.
Okay, so then I get the point that, that there's a gap then between having this big profile online and then delivering on election day. Could we say then that the street credibility, you've got to be big on the floor as well, big on the streets, big to the extent that people know you, people understand your politics, what you stand for, and then are therefore ready to follow you. Is that something that is critical? I know for a fact that Occupy Nigeria, and you know as well, when I was doing that research on Occupy Nigeria, that some of the organizers had funding coming from somewhere, you know, and we have similar stories around EndSARS. So that's the credibility thing. What do we do about that? Elections are coming. Is there anything to do about that street credibility thing to close the gap between offline and online movements?
I don't. You see, the Nigerian society is so bifurcated that every time, because of its paradoxical nature, every time you have an emerging class that first is not defined, and then later when they are defined, they become also a very unique set of people. For instance, the musicians used to play like a back row, comedians, you know, when it comes to election. But now they've become like very mainstream. It's like you almost can't win an election without comedians endorsing you, without musicians endorsing you, without social media influencers endorsing you. But like I said, it has not translated to street credibility yet, or it probably won't until they have credibility on the streets. And some of them are doing it now. They are moving their credibility onto the streets because they realize that that is what will ultimately matter. And a lot of them did it with EndSARS. A lot of people who participated in EndSARS didn't do EndSARS because they believe in fighting police brutality, because some of them actually have brutal policemen protecting them, interestingly. But it got to a point where it became the best thing to do. And it was a way to get that street credibility that they haven't had since they started their career. So they moved onto the street and gained that to the point that they can actually walk on the street because they participated in NSAS. So more of that will happen. You look like you give an example of Davido. Davido has shown over time that transformation of moving from social media to the streets. Last election in Osun State, he came out, walked on the street with people, campaigned, and then his uncle won, whether it was by hook or crook. It doesn't matter. He's the person declared as the winner of the election. So you see more of that. But when the electoral process is cleansed, you'll be seeing real substance, candidate of substance, whether they bow to comedians, musicians or not. You'll get to a point where people will vote their conscience. But we must first of all get the electoral process right. The current electoral process that we have in place can't deliver that except there's some kind of upheaval that is locking over the electoral process. That threatens those who are organizing elections. If that is not in place, if there's no dark cloud hanging over them, we'll be getting the same results.
All right, fantastic. So I promise we would not spend more than 1 hour. We are just 2 minutes short of 1 hour. We suddenly, because we have this technical issue. What's your last word for people who operate in that space, new media, citizen journalism, as elections are coming? What's a word of advice? I called you the disruptor in chief for a purpose, because Sahara reporters appear to have been the point where people began to notice. So what's your last word for those who operate in that space? Elections are coming.
Yes. I think it's for them to, a lot of them haven't come to appreciate that they have become main street, because there's mainstream media and there's main street media. I think citizen journalists have become main street because they gather the information raw from the street and it comes from anybody and anywhere. So, but also know that they will be more challenged as we approach a new line, a new corner in the history of Nigeria. What is the challenge? People are going to challenge everything you say, because now these days there are fact checkers, self-appointed fact checkers. That's why I say self-regulation has been what has kept citizen journalism very important. And if you say there's an election somewhere and there's no election there, somebody will say, no, there's no election here. If you bring out false numbers, somebody will bring out the correct numbers. And all these things, someone is also tallying and aligning them. So you see more of the need for credibility, like you've never been challenged before. Because now people also have back ends that they can look into to see, what you're doing and what your numbers are. And because more and more tools are coming out on the technological end, that's making, it even more difficult for websites to be relevant. So I'm predicting early, not very quickly yet, just like I predicted about newspapers. I think websites as we know them are also going into retirement. So if that's all you have, I'm sorry for you. You have to start innovating soon.
All right, thank you so very much. We appreciate your time. We're grateful that you could make it, even at short notice, to our first edition of the Democracy and the Media Dialogue Series. We appreciate you a lot. We wish you well in your endeavors, especially with the campaigns and the elections of next year. We'll be speaking with you so very soon again. Thank you so much.
Right,
and thank you for those who have been able to join us live on YouTube especially. We're grateful that you could make it. The Center for Social Media Research appreciates your time. all we want to do is to kick off the conversation that we started. We hope to continue monthly. We'll be getting information to you on our second edition. We're hoping we can get Mr. Japhet Omojuwa to come to sit on that seat where we had Mr. Sowore today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night.